Yeah, thank you so much for organizing this event. I'm happy to be here, everybody. I'm Anurag, and this is a really great kind of digital venue. I think international broadcasting has been around for a long time, but it still always blows my mind that we live in a world where we can talk about a topic and people can tune in from all around the world. So yeah, let's get into it. First, just a little bit about me. If you looked me up online by any chance, you might find a couple of different things. If you found my Twitter, you know that I'm a strange person who tweets screenshots of his chess games to the abyss of the zero people in the world who care. If you found my blog, you'll know that I'm a programmer and I enjoy a lot of times writing, doing small weekend projects for fun and then writing technical blog posts about them. And then if you found my LinkedIn, then you'll my presence here will probably make a lot of sense. You'll know that I'm a excited builder of product. I love learning more about building product, and I love sharing the things that I learn with the people around me. On the left side here is a picture of me from my vacation in Prague last week for people who want to know me more personally. And I'm wearing my friend's band's t-shirt. Right now, I'm the head of product at Canopy, which is about a 3.5 to 4 year old fintech company in the lending space. And I've actually been there since basically the beginning. I joined as the third employee, and now I'm leading a product team of about seven. Really brilliant team. We put together, our roadmap, our scaling strategies, our build, and really drive a lot of the direction of what we're building as a company at Canopy. And every day, I'm more and more excited about it. But I want to here kind of help you guys think about scaling and product roadmaps in sort of a similar, valuable, and structured way. Before we get too deep into product roadmaps, if you use Google or Ask Jeeves or anything like that, then you are most likely aware that there's a lot of content on the internet about product roadmaps. And one of the things that I found is that a lot of that content is about how to leverage an existing product roadmap. And it's really, really important stuff. Knowing how to take advantage of your product roadmap to drive organizational capital, to manage stakeholder expectations, to accelerate the marketing and the sales functions of your business, to align your business on the ideas that on the trajectory and the vision of your company. Those things are critical. They're invaluable. And if I had a lot more time, we'd go really deep into the strategies for leveraging a great product roadmap. But I definitely want to encourage you to do that. However, most of our focus today will be really about how do I even construct roadmaps that are going to be valuable to the business, that help us know with confidence that the things that we're building are pushing the business in the right direction, that we're not wasting our time, and that we're building something that's actually valuable, that's going to get traction with our users, that's going to drive value for the business. And on the left-hand side here, we have kind of a feature factory Frankenstein kind of product where maybe you've built and you've built and you've built and you're pumping more things out in the air. You find it very uninspiring. You haven't been able to get the kind of usage and the traction and the growth that you want to get. And then on the right-hand side here, we have like a really lovely, elegant landscape where each of the features of the landscape, such as this major river in the middle, the trees, the grass, the clouds, all sort of flow together. Everything that we've put into this product all kind of flow together in this really elegant thread where ultimately, holistically, it brings a lot of value, or in the metaphor, it brings a lot of joy to the viewer of the landscape. And to get to those kinds of, to build towards those kinds of products over an extended time horizon, you don't land on something like that by accident. You don't just pump out features over time and kind of one day wake up and your product is suddenly this great, inspiring product that brings a lot of value to your users. Sometimes I mean, it's of course it's very deliberate, but sometimes it feels very natural to kind of keep pushing and not look up at like how is my product strategy actually putting me in the direction that I want to go. Um, and so that's what a lot of this presentation is going to be about. So as far as I'm concerned, there's really 12 direct strategies for knowing that what you're building is the right thing. And all of these strategies get employed in various ways over time, over the years that you spend building your product. They get applied to different forms of problems, and they inform how to know whether something really should be on your product roadmap, if it's something valuable, if it's something useful. And it's common mistakes are either to over index for one or two of these, or to let other approaches drive what you want to build. Like maybe a decentralized approach of people kind of just building things for the sake of building things, or maybe kind of a perception that you might have this special, innovative vision that of a future, or maybe anchoring around a specific type of technology without thinking about how the application of that technology brings value to your users. And so on the flip side, if you're doing things well, if I'd say if there's 3 or 4 or 5 forms of validation that you can really defensively say you have about something that your team wants to work on or is working on, it should probably be a good signal as a rule of thumb that this is something that we should probably like set as part of the direction of the product's evolution. If you have like 7, 8, 9 of these forms of validation, you should probably almost be like in progress working on this thing. And so yeah, we're going to go through kind of each of these as our framework for thinking about how do I know if I'm building the right things? How do I know if I'm building great product? And how do I know if I'm adding the right things to the roadmap? As we do, we're not going to really focus on so much on what they are. Like, we're not going to say, oh, here's what a POC is. Here's what an MVP is. Here's what, like data driving your product decisions is, or anything like that. Instead, we're going to focus on the concept of validation and the specific nuances of each of these forms of validation and how to apply them to make good product decisions. So starting with experiments, a lot of people will think about like lean product or early stage product when they think about experiments, and that's definitely very practical applications of experiment. There's more like data-driven experimentation, A/B testing, but like when you're using experiments to validate what you're building, what's the unique nuance to this form of validation is that you're not actually validating your product. You're not actually validating the idea of what you're building. Instead, you're validating the hypothesis that must be true if you're building the right thing. Like really, like you can do this intuitively, but it's also helpful to be kind of formal about this. Like, what is my hypothesis? If that's true, then this is the outcome that I'm creating. I'll give an example. Recently, I had a friend who reached out to me and they asked me to help them build some technology. They said, "Hey, I have this great business idea, but I don't really know how to build it or how to develop it. Do you have advice on how to do this?" And I met with them and we took a step back and I said, "Hey, look, really, like if you just try to dive in and build technology, you don't really know if you're adding any value for your users. So your product is a marketplace. It's trying to connect a certain form of buyer to a certain form of seller. And before you build technology to enable this marketplace, why don't you see if you can actually like connect, if you can even create that form of value on your own? Can you get like, I don't know, look on the phone and find a buyer and find a seller and convince them to work together and create that value? If you can't, then like there's probably no need for this marketplace." And we walked away from that conversation. He said, "Thank you for saving me 6 months of work. I think I have really different next steps from this than I'd originally thought about." And it was because he needed to validate the hypothesis of his business. On an ongoing basis, as we think about scaling, this is kind of true in much more micro ways. Like before we start building a new project, what is our null hypothesis? Can we approve it? Can we reject it? How confident are we? And that's kind of the focus of experiments. Two additional forms of validation are proofs of concept and MVPs. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with both of these. And I think especially proofs of concept hold a really special place in my heart, because as you're growing and as you're scaling, proofs of concept constantly come up and they help you push through scaling challenges. What's interesting or nuanced about proof of concepts as a form of validation is they don't really bring a lot of immediate business value. And for non-technical stakeholders, they can be a little frustrating if you don't set the right expectations, because you've done a proof of concept and you haven't actually changed anything. Maybe now your sales or your marketing team is trying to convert that proof of concept into user adoption, but your product team or your engineering team isn't ready to do that. And so you need to take these as validation for what they are, which is, again, they don't validate the product, but what they validate is that we can get through the riskiest parts of building this kind of product. And it happens a lot as you're continuing to develop, because consistently you're going to hit the limits of the current patterns or the current architecture of what you're building in accomplishing the needs of your users. So when that happens, you need to introduce a proof of concept to validate that, hey, there's a new pattern that I can create or add into the code base that is like pretty practical, it's feasible, and it's going to allow us to even build the type of thing that we want to build in the first place. This is more like technical validation, but it adds a lot of value as you think about, like, am I building the right thing? Well, if we've technically validated it, that's not a reason to build something, but it's definitely a signal, or it's one of the criteria that helps you evaluate whether you're adding the right things to your roadmap. So how do you create a culture of celebrating POCs when your business teams might not see their immediate value? Like we've all been there where this is on the left-hand side, we've got like a terminal, right? This isn't like a real product. It's not an experience. It doesn't have much design around it. And yet our build teams are going to really celebrate something like this because they can see how it's unlocked the capabilities of the product. And so things that might help with creating culture where you're using POCs as a form of validation on your roadmap are things like developer show and tell, or other ways to really celebrate, make space for that, and create and chart a path from POCs to other forms of validation so that you know what you're really building. And then on the right-hand side, we have something that's a little bit more controversial, which is the MVP. These days, MVPs are becoming a little controversial for two reasons. One is, again, like we're not focusing on what an MVP is, but using MVPs to validate. A lot of times you'll launch an MVP, nobody's going to touch it, nobody's going to care. You won't get any traction, and that doesn't necessarily invalidate what you're building or why you're building it. And the reason is user expectations today are not the same as what they were when Facebook launched, the first version of their website. Today, you might not be able to validate your hypothesis or validate that what you're building brings value through an MVP, not because you're not solving the user's problem, but because your MVP was kind of scrappily thrown together, and some of the UX or some of the design is getting in the way of user expectations. They don't think that your product is really fully fleshed, and they just won't use it. On the flip side, though, if they really have a problem, they'll probably work through, especially your early evangelists, they'll probably work through and just use your MVP anyways, which signals if you can use an MVP to win over 100 people, you probably want to continue to invest in this feature or this capability to win over the next 10,000 with a great experience around the problem that your MVP is solving. But yeah, and then on the flip side, though, today, users have higher expectations, but it's easier to build quickly. There's way more developer tools. There's way more best practices and things like that. So you can kind of meet user standards with an MVP very, very quickly as well. Next form of validation for knowing whether you're building the right thing or not is user signals and observable behaviors. I'm sure many of you who build product out there have conducted a lot of user interviews. To me, observable behaviors are the strongest signal, or are often the strongest signal that you're building the right thing. At our company, we use observable behaviors a lot because we're a B2B SaaS, and we can see what our customers are doing in a lot of cases. If we have shared Slack channels with our clients, and so if we see examples of our clients using a workaround, doing something, using the product unexpectedly because they're trying to create some sort of outcome, doing something outside of the product, and then kind of referencing that to try to create value from the product, we copy like screenshots or like links to like the proof points of those observable behaviors and build those up as evidence so that later as we're building, we can reference back to those and say, hey, like we've seen this behavior. Are we actually solving the problem that's evident from this observable behavior? And we can use that to kind of make judgments in the build process about whether what we're building really accomplishes what it's trying to accomplish in the first place. And so, yeah, those really, really excite me. And then user signals as well, customer feedback, sales feedback. People will tell you what they want, and that doesn't mean that you just build what they want, but it does mean that you should have a keen eye for listening to what they're saying, so that you can use that as one of the signals to indicate whether you're building things and adding the right items to your roadmap. So now let's get kind of much more tactical and specific. And here, like, next form of validation is pretty interesting because unlike the other ones that we've talked about, external or experiments, MVPs, POCs, user signals, observable behaviors, frameworks and structured thinking are ways to validate what you're building that don't have external dependencies, and they don't and like, you can go home today and start doing some of these things right now. Again, they don't lead you to the answers, but they do help you think through both, am I building the right thing, and sort of as a blueprint for innovation, what should I even build in the first place? If you don't use really structured patterns of thinking, then instead your business is going to be driven by a lot of like, wouldn't it be cool if we built this type of method? And sometimes that'll lead you to the same results. But when we think about scaling, that method won't predictably and consistently lead you to the right results of building, features that are aligned in a cohesive experience for your product over the long time. And that's why it's important, especially as product leaders, to sit down, take time, and really think in a structured way about your product. The other cool thing about like using sort of frameworks to guide your thinking and validation is that there aren't any dependencies. You can, but they do require deep expertise in your product. So we're going to talk about like one specific exercise or one approach that, you could probably sit down for a couple hours and do later this afternoon, and it'll lead you to signals about what to build or validation about what you're building in a really cool and unique way. But this particular exercise is not really for pre-traction products. That's a disclaimer. Like if you're building something super, super early stage, there's other frameworks that might help validate your ideas. One that's good for super early stage projects in that sense is the jobs to be done framework, which you can look up online. And the jobs to be done approach really focuses on user needs, what your user is trying to accomplish, and it helps signal to you what kind of experiments you should run, what kind of MVP you should build, what kind of questions you should ask in user interviews, and things like that. But the most exciting thing about this is that this approach to validation is not empirical. So I'll give an example. Albert Einstein famously drew a lot of his conclusions for things like special relativity, not through empirical methods like in a lab, but rather through thought experiments. He would imagine himself chasing a beam of light, or he would imagine himself standing on a train with a flashlight and another train moving. And those don't give them the answers, but they're definitely a form of validation that lead them in the right direction. And so similarly here, we're going to go through kind of like thought experiments to help you think in a way that's more consistent, more predictable, and leads you to the things that make sense for your roadmap. So this particular exercise, recently our CEO asked me, he said, hey, can you tell me what all of the services or subsystems are in our product? And that's a tricky question. It's an important question, but it's a tricky question for two reasons. One is these words, services, they're kind of technically overloaded. Like, are we talking about architectural microservices? Or are we talking about like service orders, different things like that? But really in the context of product, what we're talking about is a single slice of your product that generates discrete or indirect value. This discrete direct or indirect value. The second reason that question is tricky, though, is very interesting, which is if you that the answers are not canonical. So if you ask two different experts in your product to list out all of the services or all the single slices of your product that generate value, those two people will come up with completely different lists. They might have some overlap, but really they're going to frame it in the way that they see the product. And that's actually really great. So the only prerequisite for this is deep expertise in your product, not necessarily a canonical or consistent right answers way of framing what are all the services in your product. So yeah, like step one, just sit down and write down all of them. If I do this for Canopy, I land on about 50 different types of services. I'll give you some examples. So when we say generates direct or indirect value, most applications have like a authentication service, right? It's like a single slice of your product. It gets people logged in, so it generates value, but like logging in doesn't create value, but it gives them access to your application. So it's like kind of indirect value. Other things, maybe if you think about, I don't know, like the direct messaging in Instagram is it's a slice of the product that literally facilitates communication. And so that's like generates direct value for the user. So you write down all these services. Then what are the current user touch points for interacting with each of these services? That's column 2. Column 3 is optional for the technical folks out there. What are the key details about how we've actually implemented this in our code? And then next to that, write down the service responsibility. So like, what is the singular responsibility of this service? For authentication, it's to give the user access to the application. For messaging, it's to facilitate communication between one user and another user. And so it's unique to your product, but if you understand your product deeply, you will definitely be able to say, this is this responsibility and so on and so forth. Next is how we create this loop, which is you say, okay, so we have the service, it's trying to accomplish this, but it's hitting some limitations. What are those limitations? And then finally, your roadmap item is what will fundamentally improve the service's ability to actually accomplish this job. And if you do this, you can lead yourself to some really interesting results. Let's imagine maybe that we're product managers at a company like Etsy, focused on the seller experience. And we have like a service that's responsible for converting maybe like low tier users to the enterprise plan. Maybe its current experience is that when you hit a certain volume of sales, it sends out an email and says, hey, would you like to convert to the enterprise plan? However, and so its responsibility is to convert those users, but its current limitation is that at that level, most of the merchants don't have the infrastructure to scale their current operations and generate the kind of revenue for the enterprise plan. So then on our roadmap, it becomes, okay, how can we solve that limitation of the service so we can actually accomplish the job of this service? And then like that might lead you to things like, hey, let's build Etsy Share, where you allow merchants to sort of share some of their or lease expensive tools from other local merchants to facilitate the growth. Or maybe like Etsy Loans, where you provide your merchants working capital to increase to buy the inventory and then get paid back from future revenue. Like it can lead you to all these different types of things that scale your product's ability to accomplish what it needs to do. And you wouldn't land on those ideas just by going, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we let merchants share infrastructure or something like that? All right, so this is kind of the academic frameworks. Next is data signals. These are pretty important, but often over-indexed. Like, there's data infrastructure, but if you use data right, it should point you in the right direction. The trick is a lot of people think that data is like a magic, like cold calculating silver bullet that tells you all the answers of what to build. And actually, it can only provide you insights for you to act on. Oh. All right. Then there's competitive signals. Especially as companies grow, you should be conscious of what your competitors are doing. Product strategy, we could do an hour-long talk on this, 2-hour-long talk, and many people have. So I won't focus on it too much here, but the concept is your product managers will, if they have a clear and direct strategy, then they'll be able to validate whether the things they're building actually aligns with the direction of the business. There's hard shifts. So these are like company leadership, like, oh, hey, we're planning to go international in 2025. So in the product roadmap, you want to start thinking about this. Or it can be more immediate too. Like for Brex, for example, famously recently decided to cut out 10,000 small businesses and focus only on larger businesses. And that actually did the opposite. It like was a leadership driver to remove things from the roadmap, where a product manager wouldn't have on their own, just naturally trying to meet the needs of the users, made that change. It has to be really deliberately driven by leadership or senior management. And then finally, there's a lot of people who say, okay, buzz or intuition is, they don't really like it. And like between you and me, those are also the type of people who, who will get angry if you ask them their zodiac sign. Like intuition and your company and your team buzz and pulse of your company does really matter. It should signal to you whether you're building the right thing or not. Especially because founders have an incredible sense of intuition, or people who've been building the product for a long time. You shouldn't over-index on it. You shouldn't say, oh, our founder says we should build this, so let's just go ahead and build it. But you should incorporate it as a form of validation or trust of somebody who's been really deeply working in the problem space for a long time, or that your team is rallying around this. Like that means something and provides some value in understanding what you're building on the roadmap. So different forms of validation are relevant at different stages of growth, going from like when you're really small, you might index more on user interviews, experimentation. And when you're really large, you might index more on like, hey, this is the strategic direction of the business. But altogether, these things kind of inform your build strategy if you want to build a really great product over a really extended period of time. Thanks. And I've enjoyed talking to you all.